March 18, 1945. Skies above Nuremberg, Germany. The air is burning even at 30,000 feet. The sky glows with contrails and tracer fire. Below, the city is already on fire, smoke rising like a black tide that eats the horizon. From an airstrip outside Firth, 4 Me-262s roar down a cracked runway. Twin flames burst from their engines. Blue-white, violent, unstable. The roar isn't a piston's growl, it's a scream, something new and terrible. Inside the lead jet, Lieutenant Klaus Neumann feels the vibration in his chest as he lifts off. Instruments flicker. He's airborne in seconds, climbing toward a formation of silver dots. B-17 bombers moving toward the ruins of southern Germany. Neumann's squadron is young. Boys trained on gliders, rushed into the jets after only 20 hours of flight. But they have the fastest planes on Earth. The Me-262s climb through the haze, sunlight flashing off their swept wings. The radio crackles in Neumann's headset. "Engage the bombers. Avoid the escorts." At 540 miles per hour, the bombers swell in the canopy like targets in a gun sight. Neumann squeezes the trigger. 4 30mm cannons erupt. A single burst tears a B-17 in half. The crew never even has time to jump. He banks hard, ready for another run, but then he sees them. High above, diving like silver arrows, come the P-51 Mustangs. Their 50-caliber tracers streak down in converging lines, turning the air itself into fire. One jet explodes instantly. Another shears a wing and spins out of control. Neumann jerks the stick. The engines scream. The airframe shudders. At this speed, one mistake means vaporization. He rolls, dives, and sees 2 Mustangs sliding into formation behind him. He pushes the throttle to emergency. The Jumo 004s flare white, then cough. The gauges drop. The left engine flames out completely. He's too fast to bail, too low to climb. A line of tracers crosses his canopy. Then the world turns orange. The Mustang pilot pulls up just as the jet hits the ground. The explosion blooms like a furnace. "Splash 1 jet," he radios, calm but distant. From altitude, the bomber crews see the sky turning into a crucible. The smoke, the flashes, the new machines falling apart in fire. The Me-262 had promised Maintenance to change the war. Instead, it was feeding the flames. That day, the Luftwaffe lost 11 jets, nearly 10% of its remaining fleet. For every Me-262 that rose, 3 Mustangs waited. Speed alone had become meaningless. Above the burning city, the Mustangs form up again. Their Merlin engines humming steady, their wings etched with soot. They don't look as modern, but they own the sky, through discipline, range, and endless replacements. The jet was the future. But the future had arrived too late. Nuremberg burned below, and in the sky above it, the furnace of the air war burned hotter still. By 1944, the Third Reich was collapsing, factories smoking ruins, fuel gone, pilots dying faster than they could be trained. But propaganda offered one final fantasy, the Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons that would turn defeat into victory. The crown jewel was the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Newspapers and radio broadcasts called it Der Blitzjäger, the Lightning Hunter. Its promised speed, over 540 miles per hour, sounded like something from another century. Civilians whispered that it could outrun every Allied plane, destroy bomber streams in minutes, and win the war in the air overnight. Hitler himself called it the weapon that will make the enemy remember Germany for 1,000 years. To the public, it was salvation. To the pilots, it was suicide wrapped in aluminum. Inside the Luftwaffe, officers knew the truth. The jet was too fast for its own tactics, too fragile for the front, and far too late for the war it was born into. Every Me-262 engine had a lifespan of barely 25 flight hours. The turbines melted at high throttle, compressor blades cracked, and fuel pumps froze at altitude. Most losses came not from combat but from takeoff, landing, or simple mechanical failure. Even worse, Adolf Hitler himself sabotaged the jet's potential. Obsessed with offensive power, he ordered the Me-262 to be redesigned as a blitz bomber, a fast attack bomber, not a fighter. That decision delayed production by 6 critical months. By the time Hitler relented, the Allies had already seized air superiority. The jets that might have appeared in 1944 instead arrived in 1945, too few and too late. Still, the myth persisted. Young pilots dreamed of redemption. Once the jets fly, they told each other, the Americans will burn. In reality, every Me-262 required 6 mechanics, and a small miracle, just to leave the ground. The Reich had neither manpower nor miracles left. While Germany was betting on prototypes, the United States was building armies of perfection. North American aviation had already delivered thousands of P-51 Mustangs, long-range escorts designed to accompany bombers from England to Berlin and back. Every squadron had radios, spare parts, and gasoline. Every pilot had training and fuel for multiple sorties a day. The P-51 didn't need to be faster than the jet. It just needed to be there when the jets tried to fly. The difference wasn't speed, it was uptime. Germany dreamed of a single superweapon to change the war. America built 5,000 dependable ones and changed it by volume. The Luftwaffe still called the Me-262 a miracle. But miracles don't run on empty tanks and 25-hour engines. Every time a jet rose from a bomb crater runway, it entered a sky already owned by Mustangs cruising in formation, waiting with full tanks and patient pilots. The Me-262 was the fastest plane in the world, but it couldn't outrun logistics. And that's what the war had become. Not a duel of technology, but a duel of systems. When the Me-262 finally met the P-51 in combat, it wasn't a clash of generations. It was the future colliding with reality and burning on impact. The story of the Me-262 began long before the world was ready for it. In 1939, while German tanks rolled across Poland, engineers at Messerschmitt were building something that belonged to another era. Deep inside a workshop in Augsburg, a young physicist named Hans von Ohain tested his radical new invention, a turbine engine that burned fuel not in pistons but in a continuous jet of compressed air. It was raw, violent, and unstable, but it worked. Von Ohain's partner in ambition was Willy Messerschmitt, a man obsessed with speed. He envisioned a fighter that could climb faster than gravity itself, a machine with no propeller to hold it back. The result was the Me-262 prototype, sleek and lethal in shape but cursed by timing. Its engines, the Jumo 004, were hand-built, temperamental, and hungry for alloys Germany no longer had. Nickel, chromium, and tungsten were gone, replaced with softer substitutes that burned out in weeks. The jet was a marvel trapped in a nightmare economy. Across the ocean, a different story was unfolding, one of deliberate simplicity. At North American Aviation in California, another immigrant engineer, Edgar Schmood, was sketching designs for what would become the P-51 Mustang. Where Messerschmitt's brilliance aimed for innovation, Schmood aimed for execution. His goal was a long-range escort that could fly farther than anything before it, mass-produced by workers who had never built a fighter plane in their lives. The contrast could not have been sharper. The Me-262 was built for genius. The Mustang was built for the assembly line. Germany's jet program crawled under constant interference. Hitler's demands for a fighter-bomber variant, the Sturmvogel, diverted engineers. forcing them to add bomb racks and armor that ruined the aircraft's balance. Test pilots begged for a pure fighter version, but by the time approval came, the Allies were bombing Messerschmitt's factories daily. At the same time, North Americans' Mustang project evolved like an industrial organism. The British had first requested it in 1940, but by 1942, the design had been married to the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, creating the perfect balance of range and speed. The P-51D model could fly from England to Berlin, loiter for half an hour, and escort bombers home. It was efficient, standardized, and unstoppable. By 1944, the two aircraft existed on opposite ends of a technological spectrum. The Me-262 represented the desperate leap, the gamble of a collapsing empire trying to invent its way out of defeat. The P-51 represented industrial maturity, the optimized end of piston power, the final evolution of what industry could perfect before the jet age. The Germans built perhaps 1,400 Me-262s in total, but only about 200 were ever operational at once. The Allies built more Mustangs every month than the entire German jet program produced in the war. The irony was brutal. Both aircraft were designed by visionaries who fled or fought the same tyranny. Schmood, the man behind the P-51, had left Germany years before. Disgusted by the direction of the Reich, von Ohain stayed and watched his invention become a last-ditch hope for a dying cause. The Me-262 was the future, but it was chained to the past, a masterpiece starved of fuel, pilots, and time. The Mustang was the present perfected, abundant, reliable, and always ready to fly. Two philosophies, two nations, two destinies, one defined by overreach, the other by rhythm. When they finally met in the same sky, history didn't care who flew faster. It cared who could fly again tomorrow. The jet age arrived in the middle of an oil crisis. It was a cruel joke. A nation starving for fuel inventing a machine that devoured it faster than anything before. The Mi-262 was a technological masterpiece, but every number in its design spelled disaster for a nation already mathematically defeated. Each airframe required 2,000 labor hours, twice that of a conventional Bf-109. Each Jumo 004 engine burned 1,800 liters of jet fuel per hour, and that was during a climb. Germany's entire synthetic fuel industry, crippled by Allied bombing, was producing barely 5% of its 1943 output by the time the jets appeared. Fuel was rationed, hoarded, fought over. Sometimes Me-262s were towed to the runway by trucks just to save the last few gallons for takeoff. Pilots often launched with barely enough fuel to intercept one bomber formation and glide back on fumes. And then there were the engines, marvels on paper, nightmares in practice. Each had a service life of just 25 flight hours. Pilots had to start them delicately, one at a time, to avoid flameouts. If they accelerated too quickly, the turbines would melt. If they decelerated too suddenly, the compressors would stall. More than a third of all Me-262 losses were not from combat, but from engines dying mid-flight. Contrast that with the P-51 Mustang. Its Packard-built Merlin engine, a licensed copy of Rolls-Royce's finest, could run for 300 flight hours before overhaul. The Mustang consumed about 60 gallons per hour of high-octane fuel, and the Allies were pumping 1 million gallons a day through pipelines stretching from Normandy to the Rhine. The difference wasn't engineering, it was logistics. In 1945, Germany could launch 200 operational jets. The Allies could field 5,000 P-51s in Europe alone, with more waiting on the docks in Britain. And for every Me-262 that flew once, a Mustang could fly 5 missions, escorting bombers, strafing rail lines, and hunting jets near their runways. The kill ratios told the same story. On paper, a jet could outrun a Mustang easily, 540 miles per hour versus 437. But in practice, the Me-262 was most vulnerable where numbers ruled. Takeoff and landing. When jets slowed to land, P-51s pounced. Between January and May 1945, the Luftwaffe lost over 400 Me-262s, and 70% were destroyed by piston-engine fighters. Every jet that went down cost Germany not only an irreplaceable pilot, but 2 turbines, 6 mechanics, and a week of precious man-hours that could have built 10 assault rifles or repaired 10 trucks. The air war had become an economy of destruction, and Germany's accounts were empty. The Allies lost planes too, but their numbers regenerated daily. A Mustang lost in combat meant another rolled off the line in California or Dallas, shipped, assembled, and flying within weeks. By April 1945, America's aviation industry was producing one fighter every 18 minutes. When you charted the war in graphs instead of glory, the lines told the truth. Me-262 sortie rate, 0.7 per day per aircraft. P-51 sortie rate, 3.4 per day per aircraft. Operational availability, Germany at 20%, America at 80%. The jet wasn't losing in the air, it was losing on the calendar. The Me-262 represented everything the Reich still wanted to believe about itself: fast, modern, unbeatable. The P-51 represented what modern war had actually become: methodical, mechanical, and unrelenting. The Luftwaffe had entered a race it couldn't afford to finish. Every Me-262 that took off was a miracle. Every P-51 that took off was a routine, and in the arithmetic of air superiority, routine always wins. The sun had barely climbed above the haze that morning when the 357th Fighter Group received orders: escort the bombers bound for Berlin and watch for jets. Every pilot knew what that meant. They weren't just flying cover anymore, they were hunting miracles. Captain Chuck Yeager, 22 years old and already a veteran, checked the gauges on his P-51D Glamorous Glenn III. The engines hummed steady, 61 inches of manifold pressure, 2,700 RPM. He looked left and right. 48 Mustangs, silver in the dawn light, flying east from Leiston Airfield. Beneath them, a carpet of contrails stretched toward the heart of Germany. At 25,000 feet, the call came over the radio. Bandits, 11 o'clock. High. Tiny silver flashes appeared ahead. Not propeller blades, but reflections of sunlight on jet intakes. 4 Me-262s rising fast from Brandenburg, vapor trails curling behind them like claws. Yeager had read the reports. Don't chase them. They're too fast. Hit them when they're slow, near the ground. But instinct took over. He rolled, inverted, pushed the throttle, and dove. The world blurred. Altimeter spinning, airframe shuddering as the P-51 passed 480 Mercure. The jets streaked through the bomber stream, their 30mm cannons firing bursts that ripped a B-17 apart in seconds. Yeager's wingman shouted, "They're too fast!" "Yeah," Yeager replied, "but they have to come back down." The chase didn't last long. The Me-262s, short on fuel, peeled away and ran for home. Yeager's squadron followed their contrails, circling the airfield at Brandenburg where the jets would land. They throttled back, dropped flaps, and waited, vultures over the runway. Minutes later, the first jet appeared on final approach. Its landing gear dropped, flaps down, exhaust glowing orange. Yeager lined up the shot. His thumb pressed the trigger. 850 caliber guns roared, throwing a curtain of fire into the descent path. The Me-262 erupted before it even touched the ground, a fireball sliding across the grass. 2 more followed, trying to land on the auxiliary strip. They too were caught. 1 pilot bailed out at treetop level. Another's plane disintegrated as it hit the runway, the explosion sending turbine fragments across the field. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. 3 jets down, none escaped. Yeager's squadron reformed and headed west, leaving behind nothing but flame. In his combat report, Yeager wrote, "Their speed is their weakness. They can't fight. They can only run." The Germans saw it differently. For them, the Kommando 262 wasn't just a plane. It was a symbol of hope. To watch it burn on its own runway was to see the last illusion of victory collapse in fire. That same day, the Luftwaffe's Jet Command recorded 14 aircraft destroyed, most during takeoff or landing. The Allied losses, 3 bombers, no Mustangs. Back at base, as ground crews refueled and rearmed the P-51s, Yeager walked along the line of aircraft, bullet holes patched, fuel lines checked, propellers wiped clean. The mechanics worked wordlessly, like part of a living machine. Every fighter that came back would be ready to fly again in hours. Meanwhile, on the German side, the mechanics were scavenging parts from wrecks. Pilots argued over which engines still had life left. Some jets would be cannibalized, others buried under the next air raid. 2 machines, 2 philosophies, one built for replacement, the other for reverence. In the skies over Brandenburg, the duel had looked like a dogfight. On paper, it was a massacre. The Me-262 was faster, but the P-51 had range, fuel, and time, the true weapons of the modern age. That day's mission report from the 357th summed it up in a single line. Enemy jets destroyed during approach. The future came too late. By the spring of 1945, the Luftwaffe wasn't collapsing. It was evaporating. Every number that once defined German air power now described a countdown. In January 1944, the Luftwaffe could field over 5,000 operational fighters. By April 1945, that number had fallen below 800, and only a fraction of those were the new jets. Of the 1,400 Me-262s ever built, fewer than 300 reached combat. The rest were destroyed by bombing, abandoned for lack of fuel, or cannibalized for parts. The Me-262 was supposed to reverse the tide. Instead, it became a black hole for resources. Each aircraft required the labor of 10 skilled technicians, hundreds of rare alloys, and fuel that no longer existed. Every sortie demanded 1,800 liters of aviation-grade kerosene, the same fuel that Hitler's armies were already fighting over on the ground. And yet, even as the skies filled with Allied Mustangs, Hitler ordered jet production to continue at all costs. Engineers called it madness. The Reich called it faith. By February, the synthetic fuel plants at Luna and Mersburg, the heart of Germany's fuel network, were in ruins. Allied bombers had reduced them to twisted metal. The last shipments of aviation fuel trickled to JG-7, the Luftwaffe's elite jet wing. They received less than 10% of their requirements. Pilots were ordered to save power, to throttle up only when near the enemy. One ace later recalled, "We were flying on hope and fumes." The result was catastrophic. Jets that did manage to take off were often forced down before reaching combat altitude. Some crashed during landing, their engines dead from starvation. Ground crews stripped wrecks for turbines and tubing. Entire squadrons of jets sat on airfields with full ammo belts and empty tanks, a museum of speed surrounded by exhaustion. Meanwhile, the P-51s were flying 3 to 4 sorties a day. The U.S. 8th Air Force had turned air combat into a production cycle. Repair, refuel, rearm, relaunch. Every day, thousands of Mustangs lifted off from England and France, escorting bombers, hunting trains, and circling every known German airfield. The Germans called it Der Kreisel des Todes, the Circle of Death. a ring of Mustangs orbiting their bases, waiting for jets to appear on takeoff or landing. The math of altitude and endurance had turned against them. Each Me-262 lost meant more than just a pilot gone. It meant 2 Jumo 004 engines gone. Engines that couldn't be replaced without alloys smuggled in from collapsing territories. It meant 6 mechanics diverted from repairing bombers, 30 hours of maintenance wasted, and another empty runway that could never launch again. In March, JG-7 reported 104 sorties flown, 19 jets lost, and 9 pilots killed. On the same day, Allied records listed 6,000 Mustang sorties. Losses irrelevant, replacements constant. The Me-262 had become a weapon of diminishing returns. For every hour it flew, Germany's industrial pulse weakened. For every jet destroyed, another section of the Reich's crumbling infrastructure fell silent. By April, Luftwaffe pilots were writing in their diaries, "We are spectators to our own defeat." The Americans didn't need to outfly the jets. They only had to outlast them, and that they did, with fuel, factories, and the steady grind of math. When the numbers no longer lied, the legend of the jet died with them. The Luftwaffe hadn't been beaten by speed, or even by bullets. It had been beaten by arithmetic, by a war machine that never stopped producing, never stopped flying, and never stopped coming. Each flight of Mustangs above Germany wasn't just a patrol. It was an equation. And by 1945, the answer was final. October 1944, Akmer Airfield, northwestern Germany. Morning fog curls over the tarmac as the first operational jet unit in history prepares for flight. The Luftwaffe calls it Kommando Nowotny, named after its commander, Major Walter Nowotny, a 24-year-old ace with over 250 kills. He's a national hero, the poster boy of German air superiority, but as he straps into his Me-262, he knows heroism no longer matters. The engines whine to life, that eerie, rising shriek that sounds more like a scream than a roar. Ground crews shield their faces from the exhaust heat. The Jumo turbines glow dull red in the dawn. Nowotny checks the gauges. Everything reads green. He knows it won't last. The Me-262 isn't a machine you fly. It's one you negotiate with. The throttle must be feathered like glass. Push too hard and it explodes. Pull too fast and it dies. His wingmen call it the dragon. You don't tame it. You try not to be burned alive by it. At 09:45, the order comes. Intercept incoming bombers over Münster. 3 jets roll down the runway, their tails spitting blue flame. They lift off slowly, heavy with cannon shells and the weight of Hitler's last hopes. Climbing through 20,000 feet, Nowotny spots them. B-24 Liberators stretching from horizon to horizon, guarded by Mustangs. He dives, throttles open. For the briefest moment, the world bends. The Me-262 screams through the formation at 540 miles per hour, cannons booming. 2 bombers fall apart instantly. American gunners can't even track him, but the euphoria lasts seconds. Behind him, his wingman's engine flames out. Turbine failure. Another loses power mid-turn and vanishes into cloud. The jets that survive the pass are low on fuel already. Nowotny circles, looking for a target, and that's when the sky flashes silver. 4 P-51 Mustangs from the 20th Fighter Group dive in from above, waiting exactly where the jet must slow. Their leader, Lieutenant Edward Feitner, lines up and fires. 50-caliber tracers streak past Nowotny's canopy. He jerks the stick, engines howling. One stalls, then ignites in a ball of fire. He radios, "I am burning! Can't get out!" Moments later, his Me-262 plows into a field near Ypres. The explosion leaves nothing but molten fragments. The death of Walter Nowotny ends Germany's first jet squadron after only 3 weeks of combat. In that time, Kommando Nowotny has claimed 22 Allied bombers and lost 28 jets. The math is brutal. Each victory costs more than one aircraft, more than one pilot, more than one chance to change anything. Luftwaffe High Command calls him a martyr. His funeral is filmed for propaganda reels, young officers saluting beside a coffin draped in the Reich flag. But off camera, his surviving pilots are blunt. "We are dying faster than the machines." Kommando Nowotny is dissolved days later, reformed into JG-7, the first full jet fighter wing. But even as the unit expands, the lesson is clear. Technology without infrastructure is suicide. The Allies see it too. Intelligence reports conclude that the Me-262 is a machine too advanced for its masters. It has speed, but no endurance. Precision, but no supply chain. In war, those traits are the same as weakness. Nowotny's death becomes a turning point. The myth of the invincible jet dies with him, replaced by a more desperate strategy. Hit the bombers from below, strike once, retreat fast. But every mission burns fuel the Reich no longer has. The Me-262 had entered combat as a symbol of resurrection. By the time its first ace burned, it had become a prophecy of collapse. In the distance, across the channel, American ground crews were already preparing for a new order of battle. Mustangs hunting jets, not the future versus the past, but mass versus miracle. And miracles, by 1944, were running out. March 19. 1945, Parchim Airfield, northern Germany. The jet age is alive, but barely breathing. Rows of Me-262s sit half-covered by camouflage netting, their engines still warm from the night's frantic repairs. The men of JG-7, the Luftwaffe's first full jet wing, prepare for what will be one of their last missions. The briefing is short. The Allies are sending another bomber armada toward Hamburg. Hundreds of B-17s and B-24s, escorted by Mustangs as far as the eye can see. The order from Berlin is absurd. Engage and destroy. Major Theodor Weissenberger, JG-7's commander, knows the truth. The jets will strike once, maybe twice, and then fuel and physics will decide the rest. Each pilot carries just 30 minutes of flight time. Each engine has hours, maybe minutes, left before it dies. Still, they climb into their cockpits, exhausted, loyal, and half-resigned. At 10:30, the turbines ignite, one by one. The ground shakes as blue flames roar from the twin exhausts. The jets roll down the cratered runway, leap into the air, and vanish into the clouds. 36 Me-262s, the largest jet sortie the world has ever seen. At 24,000 feet, the radar scopes at Allied command light up like fireworks. Bomber crews tense. Then they see them, silver shapes flashing across the contrails, moving too fast for the eye to track. The first 262s dive through the formation, cannons blazing. One B-17 explodes instantly. Another spirals down in smoke. For a moment, the air war reverses. The Me-262s are untouchable, slashing through the bomber stream like predators from the future. Gunners fire wildly into empty sky. Over a dozen bombers fall in minutes. The jets climb away, engines howling, vapor trails curling like smoke from a forge. But victory lasts less than 5 minutes. As the jets turn for a second pass, the P-51 Mustangs appear, circling high, waiting. They've learned the pattern. Every German jet has to land within 30 minutes, and the Allies have marked every strip that can handle them. When the Me-262 262s begin to descend, the trap closes. At Brandenburg, 2 jets are caught by Mustangs orbiting at 5,000 feet. Their pilots try to outrun them but can't dive. They're already on approach, as 50 caliber tracers stitch across the airfield. One jet explodes before touchdown. Another careens into a hangar engulfed in fire. At Parchim, it's worse. American fighters hit the base itself. Ground crews scatter as fuel tanks ignite, turning the runways into rivers of flame. Several Me-262s, still loaded with fuel, detonate on the ground. The sky over the airfield turns black. By the end of the day, JG-7 has lost 22 aircraft, more than half its force. The official German communique reports a successful interception. The reality is annihilation. Pilot diaries recovered later tell the same story. Engines failing, fuel gone, bases burning, the air filled with the smell of metal and jet fuel. "We could kill them," one Luftwaffe pilot wrote, "but they could always come back. We could not." That was the difference. The Me-262 fought for seconds. The Mustang fought for hours. The Me-262 was precision. The Mustang was persistence. By April, JG-7's surviving jets were grounded. Allied bombers had destroyed their fuel dumps, their spare engines, and their runways. A few pilots tried to relocate south, to Munich or Prague, but the war was already collapsing around them. The final swarm of March 1945 had been Germany's last throw of the dice. The fastest aircraft ever built, flown by the last trained pilots the Reich could muster. And they'd been burned away in a single month of operations. The furnace sky that day marked the end of the Luftwaffe. The Me-262s were faster than sound itself when they died, and still too slow to change the outcome. For the Americans, the Mustangs flew home in silence. The pilots didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They'd witnessed the birth and death of the jet age in a single mission. The war in the air was over, not with a bang of victory, but with the steady hum of logistics outliving genius. By May 1945, the last jets stood silent on their runways, silver husks scattered across fields of mud and ashes. The dream of the Luftwaffe had burned itself out. Germany's miracle machine, the Me-262, had proven everything right about its engineering and everything wrong about its timing. For a few dazzling seconds in the sky, it had been invincible. It could outrun bullets, outclimb any propeller, and vanish before its victims even realized what had happened. Yet the math had already doomed it. The Reich could build jets, but it could no longer build a war around them. Each Me-262 cost fuel Germany no longer possessed, manpower it could no longer train, and hope it could no longer afford. In its final months, the Luftwaffe's average pilot survival was less than 4 sorties. Jet engines melted after 25 flight hours. The factories that birthed them were bombed daily. The jet age had arrived inside the ruins of the industrial age that created it. The P-51 Mustang, by contrast, was the opposite of miracle thinking. It was boring, predictable, and perfect at being both. With a range of over 1,000 miles, it escorted bombers from England to Berlin and back 3 times a day if needed. With its Packard Merlin engine, it could cruise for hours and still fight when it arrived. It didn't chase glory. It delivered results. When the two finally met, the outcome was inevitable. The Me-262 could win duels. The Mustang could win wars. Historians often describe their battles as technology versus tradition. That's wrong. It was innovation versus infrastructure. The jet was a glimpse of what was coming, but the Mustang represented what could actually be sustained. The jet was a sprint. The Mustang was the marathon. The numbers close the argument. By war's end, over 700 Me-262s were lost. More than 70% were destroyed, not by other jets or bombers, but by piston-engine fighters, mostly P-51s. The Me-262's speed didn't save it. Its fragility betrayed it. The sky itself had turned into a furnace, where miracles melted and endurance endured. When Allied troops captured Lechfeld Airfield in late April, they found jets lined up under camouflage nets, still smelling of kerosene. Some were half-finished, others burned down to the frame. Mechanics had fled. Tools lay frozen mid-motion. The future sat there, silent, surrounded by the ashes of its present. Nearby, a captured German engineer reportedly said, "The future belongs to whoever can afford it." He was right. Within 5 years, America's engineers, many of them the same men who had built the Mustang, were testing their own jet fighters. Within 10, they broke the sound barrier. The Me-262 had been the spark. The P-51 had carried the torch. But in that final spring of 1945, it was the Mustang that owned the sky, because it could still take off, still land, still fight, and still come back. The future had arrived too late for the Reich. The present had destroyed it first. The M-262 was speed. The P-51 was time. And in the furnace sky, time always wins. The duel between the Mustang and the Me-262 ended not with a single dogfight, but with a realization that speed alone means nothing without the system to sustain it. The jet age was born in the smoke of defeat, and it would grow in the hands of those who understood the math behind the miracle. The P-51 had won the last battle of the propeller era. The M-262 had announced the beginning of something new. Between them lay the blueprint for every warplane to come, one built for performance, the other for production. When the Allies entered captured German factories in 1945, they found shelves stacked with swept-wing models, engine diagrams, and secret blueprints labeled Project 1839, early designs for aircraft that could break the sound barrier. They shipped everything west: engines, scientists, ideas. Within 2 years, American engineers, the same kind of pragmatic minds that had perfected the Mustang, began building the next step, the Bell X-1. In 1947, test pilot Chuck Yeager, once a Mustang escort commander, strapped himself into that orange rocket plane and flew faster than sound. The future that had died over Germany had been reborn over the California desert. The Me-262 had given the world its first glimpse of what was possible. The Mustang had shown what was sustainable. Together, they wrote the closing chapter of one era and opened the next. From the roar of pistons to the scream of jets, from propellers to plasma. The furnace sky had burned the old world away. What rose from its ashes was speed itself.